We're back again to discuss Arsenal against against Wolves, to discuss more Arsenal fervour and fury and just trying to effectively cope with our daily lives as Arsenal fans now. We are providing the weekly therapy session for you, as always, so let's crack on with today's show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our TGT podcast, our weekly show in which I'm joined by two fantastic guests. One and Chris this week. Welcome, Chris. I was just saying that I trapped you today because people that obviously are regular listeners and tuning in for the chat box know that you're a regular in our chat box and that you've been throwing a little bit of shade my way, it's fair to say, over the last week or so. He's been getting a little bit confident, so I thought, why not? Let's get him on the show and let's let him have his say on the show. So how you doing, mate? Are you well?
I'm doing as well as I can be. Got a good sweater on to get some cheer in my life for the Christmas time, but edging closer and closer to the edge of that proverbial cliff that we seem to continually go to as Arsenal fans.
Yes, yeah, I mean, a lot of people may be physically going towards a cliff at this stage. That's the worrying part. Is what Arsenal are going to be dragging us to. And the man that likes to provide a little bit more dulcet tones from Chicago in a more calm and confident way to calm us down and chill us out as we enter a discussion about something very serious. It's Jared. How you doing, mate? Are you well?
Doing good. Glad to be back on. And yeah, I guess that's kind of my role, is to try and have everybody take one step back away from the ledge.
Unfortunately, I think it's Arsenal are taking steps back at the moment, which is the issue. Unfortunately, I did want to highlight in the chat when we tuned in. Sometimes comments pop up before the show start. Scott K, hi there. I've been in a coma since 2004. Can somebody please fill me in on Arsenal's development since then? Cheers. Like, Jared, I'm going to let you go for gold on this one, mate. Do you want to fill Scott in of what he's missed over the last 16 years?
I mean, he couldn't have picked a better time to come back. Things are fantastic. It's all rainbows. We're right where we need to be and still getting better.
We're undefeated.
We beat Bayern 13-0 last week. It was great. Too bad you were out for that one. But you better not bring the bad luck and have us take a quick downturn now that you're out of coma.
Exactly, yes. So welcome back to the world, Scott. You've tuned in at the perfect time, as Jared says. Yes, this may be a little bit of a shock to you, this show, as we go through it. Hello, everyone in the chat box. Thank you so much for tuning in. Mugiwara says, hi, Tom. 4:30 here in Malaysia in the morning. What are you doing? Go to bed, son. What are you doing at 4:30? Just needed some therapy after that display at home against Wolves. Owen, you've got a big fan, Jared, in Owen. Says, I love Jared. Not sure about the other guy yet, though. So I'm loving this theme. The theme that's
directed to you, Tom.
I don't know that it is, because I birthed Owen into the podcasting scene, and now he is becoming this worldwide star. Is what's happening with. That sounds weird, doesn't it?
Someone better get on that in the life.
Hypothetically birthed him before we go into any ridiculous stuff. Dearie me. Christopher Fung in the chat, I don't know who this guy is, says, I was told I was getting to meet Thierry Henry, not to be a panellist on the show. You see, you're giving it in the chat and you're still here. That's the level of front that we've got tonight with Chris in the chat. Brooke says, hi, Tom, I'm still angry and I still think we have achieved some consistency we needed by losing, which is true. We have achieved a level of consistency. It's just not the level of consistency that we wanted. But thank you so much, people, for tuning in for tonight's show. We are going to provide you with as much of a level-headed point of view as we feasibly can. Before we do, though, I have a quick competition, which is something that we don't really ever do on TGT. But someone approached me about a possible giveaway and about doing something quite cool and fun. And I wouldn't usually be up for this sort of thing, but one, it's Arsenal related. Two, it's for a local business in England that's also suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic. So I thought, why not help these people out? So on your screen, you should be able to see a tweet on the TGT Twitter account at the Gooner Talk TV. Make sure you head over there, give it a follow. And on the Twitter account, we have tweeted out the giveaway prize competition scenario. It is a company called Footy Beers who have got these, I mean, we were talking about before we came on air, let's face it, some ridiculously well-made professional beer mats, which is quite cool. You got Pires, Arsene, Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Les Invincibles, Patrick Vieira, and Colo. Of course, speaking about Torre. Now, the issue is, for a lot of people, this is a UK-based thing at the moment. Chris was very disappointed when he found out about that. But it is branching out into the worldwide market in the new year. So this competition is unfortunately just for UK residents right now. But if you want to be in a chance with winning a set of Arsenal-related beer mats, which, I mean, you must be mad not to, go on to the TGT Twitter account, retweet that tweet, give myself a follow, give Footy Beers a follow, and you will be in a chance of winning a free set of beer mats that are usually about £7 plus postage. So check them out. They're absolutely fantastic stuff, and it's helping a local business that have been suffering because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's going to a good cause. Anyway, let's get on with today's show. Chris, talk to me about your initial thoughts to what we witnessed yesterday evening.
It just did not look good.
Is that it? That's enough.
I was hoping there'd be some positives to take away from the game, and you could say from a possession standpoint in the second half, we did look like the more dominant team. And if the score had been 1-1 at that point, I would have said at the end of that game that, you know, maybe we're heading in a positive direction and that there's something to build off of. But our whole attacking intent just looks like it's not there at this point. It's when we're down a goal and we need to come back, it just seems like we're at a point where our only attacking strategy is to kind of send crosses into the box, and we don't have the personnel to take advantage of that. So do I think there's some room for improvement? Yes. But it's really tough to see some shining lights right now, just because, you know, it's bad when we get to a point where we're discussing what Arteta should be doing, and he does those things and he's still not able to make the changes that we're hoping to see. So that's kind of where I am in my assessment right now.
Yeah, we'll get on to some of the changes that obviously need to occur. It is going to take a little bit of breaking down ultimately what happens. And I'm sure a lot of people watched the Raw reaction. So yesterday I was a little bit wired is probably the right word to use. I'm sure people saw it. I had a lot of comments saying, you know, things are bad when Tom's ranting, which was great. And to be fair, it does take a hell of a lot to get me going like it did yesterday. But I kind of reached my limit. Chris, you were surprisingly calm there. Jared, I suspect, again, you're one of my calmer viewers, and I imagine you've got a very level-headed way of describing this too. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah, to echo Chris, it was bad. There wasn't a whole lot of positives to take out. The frustrating part for me is, you know, what we all see is there's no style of play. I couldn't tell you what we're out there to do. Like he said, we just bang a lot of crosses in and not to great effect. And it's just tough to see how we're going to come out of it. I think over the last month and a half, a lot of us have said, well, I'd like to see this change in the lineup or this change in the lineup. And those things have happened. And, you know, the quality of play still hasn't improved at all. And that's the frustrating part is, you know, we've tried just about every lineup you can get and haven't really gotten any sort of result. So it's tough to kind of see where you go from there. And, you know, if you played a good game and, you know, you lost a close one to Wolves, they're not a bad side. They, I believe, finished above us in the table last year. They're well coached. They're always well organized defensively. You know, if you played an okay game and lost to them, you know, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But when you go out there and just don't bring anything to the table, I mean, that first 45 minutes was one of the worst halves I remember in a while. It just didn't look like anybody had a real purpose about them. And that's one of the things that's extra frustrating to me is there's a lot of times, or you'll see stretches in games where you watch a guy and you just don't see that intensity and effort that you see out of other squads. And when you're playing at the Premier League level, you have to be playing well and be organized and have that. And we don't have any of those things right now. So it's kind of tough to compete. And, you know, I think we're going to need to see some fairly major changes in our setup coming up and, you know, trying to put in a new strategy.
Chris Gear in the chat says, is this who we really are as a team? The cup wins look like anomalies. The team has too many weak links. The midfield is weak and weaker without Partey in it. Tulip says, I think we weren't dominant on our credit. Wolves just gave us the possession, sat back and chilled. And that was weird because at the end of the game, that I was surprised that Wolves actually did that, to be honest, because Arsenal have shown throughout the whole course of this season that they have lacked any kind of verve and dynamism to create chances and to be the kind of protagonists in the game. So when Wolves decided to sit back and they were bringing off Neto and bringing on defenders and Kilman came on, of course, too, and I was sitting there going, and Neves came on. Why are Wolves doing that? They're almost nearly surrendering their lead. Well, they tried to. Arsenal were never looking like they were really going to create something clear cut. And actually, it was kind of akin to the times in which Arsenal have been desperate for a goal under Arsene Wenger, that we passed the ball around the edge of the box frequently, trying to find those key spaces. But what we saw under Arsene Wenger is that there was someone that was able to make that incisive pass, make that key run, make that final ball that would ultimately lead to that chance being converted. And we just didn't create anything in those final moments, really. There was a couple of chances for Aubameyang with a header, but again, we're throwing balls into the box to a target man who is not a target man, which is very strange. And ultimately, there was no one really that could make that killer pass. And the only kind of good passes that we were making were from those wide areas. None of them were coming from a central place because we lack that central creativity. AD8 says, I think transition from back 5 to back 4, which we had to do without Partey, is making it a bit difficult for now. Carol says, as soon as I saw the lineup with the midfield against what Wolves had in their midfield, I said this could be another defeat. Gary Hardy says, Arteta saying after the game that he was happy with the desire. And Malhotra says, Tom, can you please give some focus to how people are going crazy over Saliba and Ozil? One is a kid and the other has been who had to be taken out for a while to make Arsenal competitive again by shifting to the 3-4-3. There's a lot of thoughts there, Chris, from people in the chat box that are obviously very frustrated with the situation at Arsenal right now. When you saw the lineup, and I suppose this is kind of where we start the podcast looking at the decision-making of the manager, the midfield is arguable. I think we ultimately lost the game. We were overrun so many times. They were able to spread the ball out to their wide areas really easily from the central part of the pitch. Moutinho had an amazing game for Wolves. But ultimately, that partnership of Xhaka and Sabas that was so kind of solid as we won the FA Cup last season in a different formation, playing in front of a back 4, we just look so vulnerable right now.
I think Arteta's in two minds right now. Is do you continue with the back 4 and hope that something eventually clicks and hope that, the players start developing chemistry, they start understanding the passing patterns and attacking patterns a bit better? Because if he goes right back to the 3-4-3, we're going to see that we're reverting back to that defensive shape, and maybe that's what he needs to do until January to kind of get us there. But then that transition process is going to have to happen all over again in January and onwards as we adjust again to having a back 4. We ideally have some better personnel. I think last year in the Wolves game, Ceballos and Xhaka both started, and they were also overrun in midfield. So it's not really a surprise to me that in this game, even with adding the extra midfielder, Wolves had a 3-4-3, and they dominated us in the middle of the pitch. We had nothing going for us that game from creating essential areas, like you said. I do think that in the last game, we did have a bit more attacking verve, so we were able to create from wide areas. We just seem like we're lacking that killer instinct right now. And when you look at the lineup, is there really a person that you would have taken out and added in? El Neni just came back from being positive for COVID. He hadn't trained all week. There's a case that maybe Willian might not have started. He just came back from his muscular problem, and he, I think, had 1 or 2 days of training. But you could argue that he was probably one of our more influential players when he was combining with Saka to create opportunities. Not to say that he had a great game by any means, but it's what else are you going to do with the current squad that we have? People are saying throw the youth in, just commit fully to a rebuild, but that can be disastrous for young players to come into that sort of a situation when tensions are high and no one's motivated on the pitch to kind of get a result. You're throwing in youngsters where they're going to be eaten literally by the wolves that we played last weekend. And I think you're going to have yourself in an opportunity where their confidence is deflated even further. I know it's kind of like a romantic idea that if we play the young players, some of them might break through, but it's very rare for a young player to have that impact. As you see with players like Joe and Reece and Eddie, it's rare for them to have a Saka Martinelli-like impact that you can just immediately transition from European football and carry that over into the Premier League.
And we don't really have. I look at where are we weakest right now, and ultimately with Thomas Partey out, the weakest part of our team is central midfield, and there is no youngster that can play that deep midfield position. The next one that comes up is Miguel Aziz, who has not played a single minute of senior football. Yes, he's looking very, very promising for the youth side, but he's not the type that you can just chuck in and hope that it goes well. I'm praying that we see him in the last 2 Europa League games now that we've obviously qualified for the knockout stages, but it's not someone that you can just throw in. There are some young players that I think could be given an opportunity. Emil Smith-Rowe, I feel, is one of those with the way that he's been playing in the under-23s. He came in, obviously, against Mulder and got an assist almost immediately with Balogun there as well. And speaking of Balogun, Jared, there are young guys in that striking role that a lot of people will be looking at and thinking, well, Balogun is hungry. He is someone that wants to be playing. He's someone that's said time and time again, and the reasons why he was reluctant to sign a new contract is because he couldn't see a route into the first team. And the play that's starting currently in the central striking role, which is something that a lot of people have yearned for, Aubameyang playing in the middle. He, for me, I still kind of haven't calmed down, but I haven't wavered or haven't diminished in my opinion of his performance. I thought it was despicable. I genuinely thought it was one of the worst captain's performances I've ever witnessed.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought of all the players that were disappointing yesterday, Aubameyang for me was the most so. And a big part of that is we expect more out of him, being that he is the talisman, he is the captain, and he's somebody that should, in games like that, be the one getting guys in order, showing some leadership, having that intensity to compete. And there's a lot of times he looked like he didn't want to be out there. He didn't think he was getting any service, which he wasn't. But, you know, if you wear the armband, you've got a responsibility beyond, you know, what you're supposed to do in your position. And I don't think he really does a lot of that. I think, you know, at this point, he's going to be the captain because, you know, he's the best player on the team. It'd cause an absolute uproar if you removed him now. And I think he got it basically, obviously, because of what happened with Xhaka last season. But when you watch the team play, a guy like Xhaka, who, you know, I don't think is the answer to any of our problems right now, does at least show those leadership qualities in some cases that you want to see. And I think we just lack that with Aubameyang, and especially the games like yesterday. It was really, really disappointing to see kind of the way he carried himself. As far as your point on Balogun, the one thing I'll say, it's not good for Arsenal, but is good in the pursuit of keeping him, is our strikers right now don't score any goals. If ever there was a time he thought he could break into the team, you know, you've got Aubameyang hasn't scored in, 7-8 games. Lacazette hasn't scored really beyond the first 3. Eddie hasn't really done a ton in the Premier League, although I think he's had some positive moments. I think if you're Balogun, you came on for one game in the Europa League, scored in about 30 seconds, likely are going to get a couple more chances now that we've secured, our spot in the knockout stages. So, if he comes in and plays well and those next 2 games, bags a couple of goals, I don't see any reason we wouldn't put him on the bench and at least give him a taste of the first team. I'm not a huge fan of putting guys that young in there. It's a little bit out of their depth. But at this point, if you're really trying to keep him, I don't see the problem in putting him on in a game, letting him get a few minutes at the end, hopefully because we're up by a few goals. Doubtful, but that's the hope. But I think that's the pitch to him right now is, look, we have a lot of strikers, but no one's scoring goals. There's kind of a void there. If you kind of grab that spot and take it over and just make it undeniable that you can play, if he goes out and bags a hat trick the next Europa League game, there's going to be a lot of people saying, maybe we don't need Eddie on the bench for the next Premier League game and get him in there. So while it's bad news for Arsenal that that's the way it is, I think it's good for keeping Balogun that we're in a scoring drought and, you can kind of tempt him with, there's a spot there to be taken if you go out and grab it, and maybe that's enough to make him reconsider leaving. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that if we can, there needs to be a route for these young guys. If they play well in certain positions, they need to be rewarded for that. I think that, and I have a really worrying feeling that Arteta has maybe slightly given in at times to, not necessarily fan pressure, but in a way I think that obviously the fans' opinion is so loud at times that it can bleed through to the team and bleed through to the manager. There was a lot of people wanting Willock to get a chance straight after his really good performance at home against Mulder and the performance he put in against Dundalk as well. And it took a week or 2 before actually Willock did get into the 11. And by the time that he had got into the 11, that kind of high that he was on after those games had kind of petered out because he hadn't been given that immediate chance into the first team. There was also the big call to put Aubameyang through the middle. There was a lot of journalists asking Arteta about if he could play Aubameyang through the middle, and then it suddenly has happened. Whether or not Arteta is suddenly bowing to that pressure and kind of doing what people want him to do rather than maybe sticking with his ideals is obviously something that people want to see, but whether or not that actually works is another thing, and maybe him giving into that is a little bit of a problem. I don't know if it's me reading into something too much like I typically tend to do, but I think there is something there within that. Let me just jump into the chat box and see what some guys and girls are saying. Bernard Baptiste says, Arteta is a young manager who probably finds it easier to get hungry young players to buy enthusiastically into his plans rather than play to experienced players' strengths. Lewis Kiriakou says players aren't good enough. We haven't finished in the top four with Xhaka in the squad. We have missed Jack and Santi for years in terms of actually them playing in that base of the midfield role. Richard Rick 731 says Lacazette has gone backwards big time. Arsenal Granny points out that we've got a big hope in Martinelli, who is looking really good in training. And Malhotra says Aubameyang's body language and demeanour in the game was extremely worrying. Also because except Bellerin maybe, we have no characters who can be the captain of this team. And ultimately this side does lack leadership. And I think ultimately there's an element that Arteta hasn't really got the characters to play onto to get that kind of encouragement through to them that they can then bleed that onto other players. Watching back, and I just did this out of pure frustration of seeing an Arsenal team that I just don't really identify with. I was watching the 89 documentary again and listening to kind of Tony Adams talk about how it was his job to get Graham's thoughts into the team, and when it didn't happen, ultimately the game didn't go the way that they wanted. And I just can't see Aubameyang really putting his authority down on those other players because they're all mates, and that's the way it sometimes comes across, is that there's no one that really wants to stand up and be counted at times because they don't want to step on each other's toes. They don't want to be perceived as the bad guy or perceived as, well, that guy's been a bit of a, what today or whatever. So there doesn't really seem to be anyone that's going to willing to take that responsibility right now. And I'm worried that also the coach is in that same position. And I tweeted out at half-time that I said that Mikel had to get into these players at half-time. And for me, they did not come out in the second half with any sort of evidence to show me that had happened. Chris, let's talk about the coach. I have backed him to the hilt on the channel so many times. And there does come a point when you have to hold your hands up and say, I have backed him, I've supported him, but you can't just be ignorant to issues that are perpetuating through the team and coming from the coach. Do you think that ultimately he can turn things around with the current crop of players, or do we then need to wait until a window to get them in? But then is it forgivable to say we lose several games up until the window because he can't improve the current crop?
I don't think it's forgivable to lose in any circumstance. So I think he needs to be getting more out of the current group than he's currently getting. I think it's fair to start asking questions. He's been in the job for almost a year now, and we've kind of reverted back to the same style of play as we did under Emery, where the players look like they're losing confidence, they're losing faith in the system. They're not executing whatever plan it is that he's setting up for them, or maybe the plan isn't very good. I'm not really sure. I'm not there myself, but I do think that it's fair to start asking questions of Arteta, just because you look at some of the other managers around the league, they're able to do more with less. And this team just has the talent, on paper at least, to be challenging for at least the top six, let's say, to be fair. A lot of the teams that are around us that are doing better, they finished better than us last year. They've been more consistent. They've had the same manager for a longer period of time, and they've been able to add pieces to that core over time, which has allowed them to have better chemistry and a better on-field product. So I'm inclined to say that I think Arteta does need a little bit longer. I know that's not what most people want to hear, but he hasn't had a year. We weren't going to fix this team in one window, dating back to kind of the late Wenger years and the Emery and Raul years. And we'll probably touch on this a bit later, so we won't go too far into it, but there just wasn't a coherent transfer strategy in terms of what we need to do. We let players like Santi, Jack, Ozil, and also Ramsey leave on a free, and we never really replaced them. So we had all these creative talents in our squad, and you can see that lack of creativity is killing us right now, is that we have no ideas in attack, and part of that is on Arteta or maybe the management team for saying don't include those in the squad. But if you're going to make that big decision, you're going to have a plan B in terms of if it doesn't work out, this is your strategy moving forward. And I don't think Arteta's found that right balance yet.
No, I don't think the balance has been found. And that kind of leads into my next question quite nicely. Jared, yesterday was a year since Unai Emery was dismissed as Arsenal manager. If we're talking about moving things in the right direction, do you think, and honestly, has Arsenal progressed in this year that we've left without Unai Emery in the team?
Yeah, so this is where I'll come in and be kind of the positive voice on the pod. I think we've progressed in that, if a year and a half, 2 years ago, you said, how many guys in our starting 11 would you say you're happy with in their position for the next 3 to 5 years? It would be a fairly short list. Aubameyang, maybe Bernd Leno right when he got here. And from there, I don't know. You'd really have to start looking. Whereas now, I think, Leno, to me, I know some people are still upset about the Martinez thing. I like Bernd Leno. I think he's a great keeper. I like him to stay. You look at Kieran Tierney, Gabriel at center half, Saka, Martinelli, Aubameyang still. We've got, that's a quick half dozen of guys who we all say we would want to stay for the next 3 to 5 years. So I think in terms of personnel, Thomas Partey, the obvious one I left out there. So I think in terms of personnel, we've improved. Now we're obviously not where we want to be, but I think there has been progression, and people fall back a lot, and people are kind of sick of saying, but we won an FA Cup. But it does matter a little bit, especially when you start talking about, people are questioning Arteta and what his status is. I think he's bought himself a fairly good bit of time with those successes, not just in winning the FA Cup, but, in less than a year, he's beaten Liverpool, City, Chelsea, United at Old Trafford. He's had some really positive moments, and I think that's kind of built him up some credit to where I don't think internally there's really any talks of any move happening with him as of now. I mean, obviously that's subject to change, but I think he's pretty safe. Additionally, the other side of that, I see a lot of people who say, well, look at Guardiola or Klopp with this squad. They would make us considerably better, which I don't disagree. But if you sack Arteta now, one of those two guys isn't coming in to take over. So when you want to get rid of somebody, you have to have a replacement in mind. And while there are some good coaches out there, another one like Nagelsmann, a fantastic coach. I think he does a lot of good things. People would love to see him. But if we fired Arteta tomorrow, is he going to leave his current situation, play in Champions League, and then write in his own ticket wherever he wants next summer, take over our situation? There's no way. So I'm happy with Arteta staying where he is. I think he's done enough to where I'd like to see him get a good amount of time. I'm really not a fan of manager turnover. And, I was on the team of wanting Emery to go at the time he went. In all fairness. So, I was already past where I wanted us to be with him, but it just kind of puts you behind the 8 ball when every year you change managers. It's tough to really gain any continuity and have an established style of play, which we already are lacking severely. I don't think we're going to improve if we just sack him and bring anybody else in mid-season. And I like him to go past this season and moving forward as of now, subject to change, depending on how the rest of the season goes. But as of now, I'm happy with Arteta. I think we have shown improvement overall in some of the results we've gotten while these first 10 games have been bad. But more so, I think the personnel is continuing to improve. And another good window in the winter, another good window in the summer. And the team could look dramatically different. One of the great American sports stars, Charles Barkley, always said of pro sports, sometimes it's not about X's and O's, it's about Jims and Joes. And if you don't have the players out there, it doesn't matter who's trying to lead them, you're not going to get the results you want. So I think him continuing to develop with the young players and also us continuing to make hopefully some good moves in the next window or two, I think we're going to be on a good track to at least be heading in the right direction. And also now we've had the worst start in the history of the club, probably for the first 10 games. We're only 4 points out of 5th. So as bad as things have been, we're not at a point where the season's at a loss. We're 2-3 wins in a row potentially from being back in, qualification for Europe.
Yeah. Go on, Chris. I know you wanted to jump in as well.
I was just going to add to Jared's great point is that at this point, I think we have to also give credit to the fact that we're starting to see some alignment and cohesion between the management team and the manager. Is we're actually starting to see them move kind of in that right direction. When you look at kind of what we had before with Emery and Raul, it seemed like they're always kind of at heads with one another, and they each wanted to take the team in a different direction. And we saw that with kind of the turmoil that happened with Sven Mislintat and Raul, is that everyone has these ideas and not everyone was moving in the same direction. So I do think that with Emery out and Arteta in, that we are starting to get some semblance of balance back, and hopefully it's a foundation that we can build from, as Jared was alluding to. I think if Emery was still here, we'd probably still have Raul here, and we know how much of a disaster that was.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of break down from what you both said. I think that I kind of struggle to look at the overall thing to say that we have progressed. I think that we have improved, and I wrote about it in this morning's piece about how I think that we've definitely improved in terms of defence. We've improved in terms of competing against some of the top sides in the country. You look at the win against Manchester United, you look in the way that we performed at Anfield and at the Etihad that was so different to how we have done in the past. I mean, under Unai Emery, we went into those games with zero chance, and those sides completely blew us away under Unai Emery because his style was so submissive to allow opposition sides to come onto us so easy. Whereas Arteta has sorted out to an extent that defence to what I feel is as much as you can. It's never going to be perfect with the players that we've got. We are still going to make mistakes. I think that ultimately there are characters that you look at that right-sided centre-back spot, no matter who plays there, be it Holding, be it Louise, they're not of the same level as I look at what Gabriel is. So you're going to see mistakes on that side. Bellerin, who I think is getting back to what he was, I still don't think he's quite there yet. He is going to leave gaps in behind that are going to get used and utilised. And Tierney has, whilst I think been one of our better players, he has actually been exploited a couple of times. Adama Traore got in behind him very easily in yesterday's game on a number of occasions. I think there are going to be existentially defensive areas that maintain, but ultimately overall, Arteta has improved that area. What I would say is, though, is the reason why I don't think we've progressed is because I think we've gone so far from one direction to the other, and our offensive side of our game has detracted so much, and we now can't seem to create anywhere near the frequency of chances or the quality of chances that we were creating, admittedly, and rather painfully to say, under Emery, that we were making. You look at the game at home against Leicester, some of the play that we had in that game was unbelievable. Now, it wasn't consistent under Emery. We didn't make those types of chances in every single game, but we did make them more often than we have done under Arteta. I think that ultimately this does come down to the squad still, and that's why I'm still maintaining my 70-30 on the players being one of the key issues rather than the coach. But as when I was listening to Arseblog the other day, we can talk about the medium to the long term all we like. Football is a game of results, and the short term does matter, and the results that we're getting right now do matter because they ultimately will guide kind of the perception of the club from the fans' perspective. We talk about this on TGC all the time, as a fan base, are extremely reactionary. Arsenal fans are very emotional people, and we look at things on face value and we look at things from the last result, and you're only as good as your last result from the eyes of many, and the majority, I feel, of our fan base, and from myself at sometimes. I've got so put to the point now where it feels a little bit numb when we lose. I was a lot more hurt, I think, after the Leeds draw than I actually was after yesterday's defeat, which was strange for me. So I kind of was used to it in a way that I wasn't really expecting anything more than we got. And if anything, the little bit at the end of the game where we started to attack and where we looked a little bit more livelier, I think kind of put a little bit of a gloss on the defeat in a way, and that gave you that kind of sense of false hope when actually, when you look at it in reality, Wolves backed off at the end of that game and allowed us to come on to them. So I think overall, Jared, I slightly disagree in thinking that I think we are at a standstill in terms of going so far backwards in offensively. It balances out how much we've improved defensively. But I do get your point of view, and I do think that ultimately what you were saying, Chris, as well, the personnel is so key. Like, it's so key to look at who is available to him right now. And I just can't quite see things improving with the current crop of players. Let me jump into the chat box before I go back to you guys to see if you want to add anything to that. Hilmy says, so it's down to the players. Our senior players need to step up quickly to save our season. Matthew De Souza says, we look a million miles off Tottenham and Chelsea, and therefore all we can do is drudge along until the summer. Mal Hotcher says, Arteta realised we're mediocre, changed to a 3-4-3, which even he doesn't fancy, managed difficult games to get results, and took the necessary decisions like dropping Ozil, and the players should answer to him now. It's an interesting one, that the formation. It's kind of something that I want to talk about a little bit. Chris, I'm going to come to you first. Do you feel that because we are clearly so lacking centrally in terms of creativity, that we do need to go back to the 3-4-3? I feel that it was something that it was worth trying going to the back four, because ultimately in the long term that's what Arteta wants to do. But I think it's been a mistake because ultimately he just hasn't had the personnel and the quality to be able to move to that back four. And we haven't had Partey as well, which I think has been a massive miss for us having him out. So do you think it is time that we revert to the 3-4-3, use a system which utilises the wide areas, having both fullbacks and wingers, to utilise our strongest areas, which are the wide areas, to kind of go at teams like we did against Fulham in the opening day of the season?
I think that's a difficult question, just because I think we've seen that 3-4-3 we were struggling to create with that formation too. So I don't know what the answer is at this point. I think the only thing that I have left is play soccer really in centrally, and I don't really know if that's going to be the solution that helps to unlock our attacking players. There's just something I think fundamentally wrong with Arteta's system, and I think you laid it out earlier, is that transition needs to be a gradual transition to go from a back three to a back four, even though from an attacking standpoint we were shifting to a 4-3-3. I don't think the formation matters that much. It's more that our players need to kind of have that belief and understand the patterns of play of moving the ball quickly. The one positive I forgot to mention at the start of last game is, I don't know if you guys saw, but in the first 5 minutes when we actually finally got the ball, we sliced through that Wolves defense.
We did, yeah.
I was getting excited again for an Arsenal game. I said, I've never seen us play like that. So that for me is exactly what we need to continue doing, is just move the ball quickly.
Why did it stop? Why do you think it stopped?
And I think this is the point that I want to get to, is that Jimenez and Luis header, I think that took something out of the game for a lot of the players. That role that we had is we weren't able to recover from it, and the Wolves team were quicker to kind of react to that situation. We were very switched on for that first 5 minutes, and it felt like as soon as that happened, I don't want to give an excuse, but it felt like that just sapped the energy out of the game altogether, and we just couldn't recover after that point. But in terms of the formation point, I think it's hard, because I think Arteta is kind of at a crossroads at this point where he can persist with the back four formation, but we're probably going to be susceptible to conceding goals. But switching to that back three formation isn't going to help too much either, because we weren't able to create very much. Even going back last year, we did score some key goals by overloading the left-hand side. And maybe that's a solution there, is we need to get a player like Mainsley back into the squad, because he's able to create some organized chaos. But through his runs alone, he opens up space for others, and we just don't have that right now. We don't have runners on the field that are opening up space for others. So maybe that's something Arteta has to go back to. He didn't let Mainsley leave in the summer, and hopefully, maybe we just need a bit more of that energy and athleticism back, and that'll open up some space for others. But in terms of formation, I think regardless, back four, back three, we're going to see the same thing until the personnel changes. Arteta's already done a masterful job in the FA Cup last year to kind of get the most that we even started to believe that Xhaka and Mustafi were maybe above average players again, reaching their potential that Wenger and Emery couldn't unlock. But I think what we're starting to see is that you can only fix those kind of cracks for so long until it's all going to implode. And that's kind of what we're seeing, is that people are saying, I think with David Luiz, he should have been subbed off right away, and we might not have conceded those 2 goals with Holding on the pitch. But what I saw was Holding basically being pulled out of direction the entire game as soon as he stepped on the second half. It just doesn't look good right now, and I think we've moved away from that strong defensive structure. So if anything, a 3-4-3 might help us be more defensively resilient again, and that might help. But we also got sliced open 3-0 by Villa playing the 3-4-3. So
yeah, it was a weird time, wasn't it? Because we couldn't really work out if we were playing a back four or back three when we were defending it. It looked like it was the back three again, but when we moved forwards, it looked like it was a back four. So it has been fluid. Maybe there is an element of it being too fluid, and that players have kind of got lost in their responsibilities and their roles in where they need to be on the pitch. Mainsley being left out for tactical reasons yesterday, I thought was a really strange one as well, because considering how much cover he does give you in multiple positions. And I look at what he could do as a central midfielder, and I look at Granit Xhaka as someone who is so immobile and gets turned so easily in the centre of the park. And Mainsley's got that recovery pace, and he's got that mobility that I feel that he could come in and play in that position next to, say, an El Neni, rather than playing next to a Xhaka. And that formation of playing with maybe an El Neni and a Mainsley in midfield is something that interests me. So for me, Xhaka is kind of. And people know how much I've defended that guy on the channel, and I always point out the context of defending him is more down to I feel that the criticism he got previously was a little bit hyperbolic and exaggerated to actually the performances that he was giving us. But if we are looking at on face value and we're looking at where Arsenal need to be, Arsenal are not going to be pushing towards the top four with Granit Xhaka in the midfield. And I don't think that's unfair or harsh to say that anymore, because he does get turned too quickly now. He has lost that consistency, and his positives are getting outweighed, unfortunately, by the amount of negatives that he has in his game. Tulip in the chat says time to bring Mainsley back at left wing back, shift Tierney to left centre back, El Neni and Sabas in the middle, Saka at right wing, Willian on the bench as we miss Laka's hold up play and will be needed in a back three. Yorick says if you can listen closely you can hear Gladbach and Valencia still laughing at us in terms of Mustafi Xhaka. Chris Kiwa says in terms of our transfers, what are you guys' thoughts on James Ward-Prowse as a possible player? It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think he's a player that I think a lot of people would turn their noses up because of who he is, basically. He's a player at Southampton, and a lot of Arsenal fans often do turn their noses up at Premier League talent. It's something that maybe we haven't look to invest ourselves into often. We could get dragged down on transfers for a long time. And I want to get the opportunity to get you guys to ask some questions too. Before we do, Jared, kind of looking at the last kind of area that we haven't touched upon was that incident that Chris talked about between David Luiz and Jimenez. First off, we now are aware that Jimenez fractured his skull, which is a horrific injury to get during a game. It's good to know that he's conscious and he was responding to treatment. That's great news, and we're very thankful, and obviously we wish him the best of luck with his recovery. There's a couple of things to touch on with this point. Initially, concussion substitutions is one. Wolves, coming from an Arsenal perspective, are very hard done by to lose their star striker within the first 5 minutes of the game. And obviously we lost David Luiz at half-time, and that builds me on to the second point is, should he have ever been on the pitch beyond that point? Talk me about both of those tangents.
So, yeah, like you said, it's a horrific injury, and thankfully it sounds like Jimenez is doing okay. You know, in one like that, you hope for their well-being in general. Take football out of it. You know, if you have a skull fracture, that's a pretty severe injury. So it's nice it sounds like at least he's doing okay at this point, so that's a positive. As far as Luiz staying on, with everything that's being done and talked about in pro sport about concussions and CTE and brain deterioration as you age from these things, I thought it was pretty embarrassing that he stayed on for the rest of the first half. I don't think there's any way that you can justify a guy who takes that sort of impact to the point that the other person suffered a skull fracture and is even once bandaged bleeding through it almost immediately. I don't think there's any reason that he should be out on the pitch for the rest of the half. And I think the Premier League, and I think this is something that will probably get brought up in the offseason, there needs to be a third party, you know, an independent medical staff there to evaluate head injuries. You can't rely on a team's medical staff, not that they're not capable and good physios and all of that, but they have a rooting interest in the game and what happens, you know, and if they think it's going to help the team, they may just kind of give somebody who's borderline the okay to go back in. And players are always going to tell you they want to play. No one's going to say, yeah, you know what, I'm not feeling great, I should come out. So somebody independently needs to come in and make a sound decision for the player, take the game and the teams out of it and just say, what's the best for this person's health moving forward? And I was shocked when I saw Luiz stay on, and I almost felt more upset about it when he came off at halftime, because at that point you're basically admitting, yeah, he shouldn't be out there playing, and, you know, treating it like you would an arm injury or a knee injury of, you know, let's just see how it plays out and decide at halftime, I think is pretty silly. And I think moving forward, not only will they look at maybe some independent medical staff to make those decisions, I would love to see in a situation like that where it's a clear head injury, and obviously we have VAR, you can take a look at these things. I think I would say in the first half of games, if it happens, it should be a free substitution. If a guy gets knocked out of a game from a head injury, I'm hesitant to say the whole game, only because, you know, it just opens the door for someone who used all three subs to get an extra substitution. And I think that's something that they probably don't want to get into. But if it's an incident in the first half, I don't see any reason we shouldn't get a free substitution for that. or the Wolves shouldn't get a free substitution for that. And then in the second half, if you've made your 3 subs and it happens, you can play with 10 men like you would otherwise. I don't think that's unreasonable if a guy can't continue and they've been deemed unfit. But I think that's an area that we're going to see some major changes, and that'll be a big discussion point this offseason. And that's a good thing. I think the game could use it. I know over here in American football, it's been a huge issue over the years, and they've done a number of studies about just the impact for that player, not now, but 10, 15 years from now. And some of it's pretty scary stuff when you're taking repeated head injuries. So, I thought Luis staying on was a little bit, it looked bad on Arsenal all around. Hopefully, we won't see that sort of thing again. They'll get enough backlash that they say, the players' safety should be paramount over, us keeping a sub in a game and make some adjustments. But a horrible situation all around. Glad everyone's sounds like doing okay, but it's definitely an area I think we're going to see some major changes before the start of next Premier League season. Oh, you're still on mute, buddy.
Classic me. Tom in the chat says football needs 10-minute replacements while head injury can be assessed and are being made like in rugby. The sub could be a bonus one if the injury is confirmed. I think it could be a little bit tricky to get that going. I feel that leaves things more open to maybe exploitation. I think I agree with you, Jared. I think that ultimately it needs to be something that you can. When you were talking about saying the second half, it's not given. I think maybe that will open things up again to maybe a little bit of controversy, possibly if they do happen. What I would say is that I agree with your point completely when you were like they need a third party within the area to basically turn around and say that, look, this person is not okay to carry on. And I think that once that's made, that side can then be given the opportunity to make a substitution. It is mental. And I saw an amazing statistic that apparently 10% of concussions are diagnosed through unconsciousness, and that 90% are diagnosed through other signs that can't be told through just a person becoming unconscious. So it does go to show that even when a player is deemed to have had a head injury, that there could be concussion there beyond just the fact that if they were or they weren't unconscious, which is almost nearly impossible to detect. So things need to change, and that is ultimately the biggest thing that we should take away from this. And I ultimately think that there should be questions asked of the medical team of the priorities to keep David Luiz on. It was because ultimately he was also on for both of the goals that we conceded, and you can't ignore that fact that there could have been a change if we had a centre back that was completely with it during the time, and that there may have been a change in decision making were David Luiz completely coherent during those periods. So that is something that definitely needs to be looked at. Right, let's move on to the final part of the show, which is of course our questions from the live chat to myself, Jared and Chris. So if you'd like to throw in a question, just use a capital Q in the chat and we will pick them out for you. Chris, let's start with you from Yonic Mac. He says, Partey, WTF. What's going on there? Arsenal, just for some reason, we sign players, they get injured. Why?
I think for this, it's more that how is our injury prevention and kind of injury team, and physio team in general, just not been looked at and not been reviewed and overhauled more. It seems like every player that comes here, they have no track record of being injured, and then they suffer a long-term injury as soon as they come here. And I know that injuries are a normal part of the game. Other teams suffer through similar fates, but I think in the past 2 years or 3 years, we've probably had 4 or 5 knee injuries now, and it just hasn't been looked at. And I do think if we're going to use Tim Lewis for something, he's up there kind of reviewing the Arsenal redundancies, as he calls them. I feel like our injury kind of prevention team, physio team is something that needs the next look, is that we just haven't gotten it right for the longest time. And it's sad to see, because you can see how reliant we are on a player that we just kind of brought in the last window. And he's become such a big integral piece to this team, and we just can't even keep him healthy. It looked like a kind of a thigh knock to begin with, and even people in Party's camp were positive that this is something he can kind of come back from really quickly. But now we're starting to see that unless it's just masterful mind games from Arteta, that something's just not quite right.
It's just, I just don't understand it really. I don't really get. I mean, we saw it with Danny Welbeck. barely ever injured before he came in, and he could barely get a game for the club. Gabriel Martinelli gets an injury of his knee in training before the season comes back underway, which is just insane as well. There are countless others. Santi Cazorla is another one you look at, who has now gone off to, I believe, Saudi Arabia and has had no injury issues at all since going over there. It is mental, and I wrote it in the piece this morning that there needs to be some form of inquiry. As you said, Tim Lewis is there to look at things, and this is something that should be looked at, because it is frankly ridiculous that these things keep cropping up, that they keep happening. Blue Whale says, Jared, with our next 6 fixtures relatively tricky ones, which include Spurs, Chelsea and Everton. It's quite funny, isn't it? Because we just had games against Wolves, Leeds and Villa at home. Games that we looked at and thinking, right, we can pick up some wins here. And we've lost them all. So now we've got to look ahead to Spurs, Chelsea and Everton. Can you see Arteta's job in serious trouble by Christmas?
So we touched on this a little bit earlier. I think if we see, really poor results in those upcoming fixtures, I think in the Twitter world and the fan world, you're going to see that becoming more and more prominent. Like I said before, I don't think internally that's something that Arsenal's thinking about right now. I think it would take a pretty exceptional circumstance to have that happen, in that I think he's basically guaranteed through the end of this season, and I think maybe beyond. I just don't think the team wants to go through another manager change and switch. And I think he's built up some credibility with some positive results. And another important piece that is completely off the pitch, I think the people at Arsenal like Mikel Arteta. I think they like him. I think they like what he represents, the way he handles the media and all the things he says. And while there's an argument to be made that shouldn't matter, I think it really does. And I think the fact that they like him on a personal level really works in his favor. And at least in my opinion, right or wrong, I don't think there's going to be any talk of Mikel leaving anytime this season.
No, I don't think so either. I genuinely think he could lose a fair few games up until Christmas and it still wouldn't necessarily change things.
And one more thing to add on that, as down as everyone is right now and we've come off a bad result, the nice thing about having fans that are so reactionary and emotional and swing so widely, imagine if we go to Spurs this weekend and win 3-0. Everybody will say we're back. Arteta's the best, and we're on track for greatness.
Yeah, it is mad, isn't it? I mean, that is the way you look at things, is that if things do go well. I mean, you go watch the Raw reaction show of me after the Man United win compared to me yesterday. Like, it's such a stark difference in how things change so quick. We have received a hell of a lot of questions coming, boys, and I want to try and get through as many of them as possible. So let's try and speed answer through as many as possible. Jimmy Mack says, if Arteta goes, who do we get? I'll take this one very quickly. I think that it doesn't really matter who you get. I think if you look at, there's a guy at Villarreal right now that's doing very well in Spain, in Unai Emery. It's not necessarily you look at what's currently going on. You need to take into account so many different factors. And I just don't think that there is anyone, and we touched on this earlier, that could genuinely come in and improve what we currently have right now. Pochettino, I just see a lot of people saying, he ain't coming. Like, there's no the Spurs link. He won't go to Barcelona because he was an Espanyol coach. He will not come to Arsenal. Chris, Matthew De Souza says, we appear to be one of the worst teams out of possession. We lose out on the second ball, 50-50s and general athleticism. This was not the case at the end of last season. What do you think's gone on there?
For me, it's that kind of transition from the back 3 to the back 4. We've kind of lost our identity in even defense a bit. We're able to set up in our shape. We're a little bit better, but it's, for me, the biggest issue is actually our pressing. If you look at what we're doing without the ball, and once we allow teams to almost come onto us, similar to how Emery did before he was ultimately let go. I think that's a big piece there, is that we've almost, without Partey, we can't play the same way that we wanted to ideally, and that press just isn't happening in the same way as consistently as it was, where we had wave after wave of defense and we were actually cornering people who had possession of the ball directly into another one of our defenders where we could strip them and go on the counterattack.
Jared Robert Parker says, should Arteta be playing the football we can do now as opposite to the football he wants to? With no real pre-season, we don't seem to have the time to wait for our team to get it.
Yes, 100%. I'm all for moving to the back 3 that worked at the end of last season, bringing Maitland-Niles back on, and that was the only situation where we saw Xhaka and Ceballos put pretty good performance. So yes, I would go with what's going to work for right now, and I'm team back 3 until at least Thomas Partey comes back.
Yeah, I am on board with you there. Jason says, do you think the club will bring in any decent signings in January? We couldn't have a question session without a question on transfer.
Tom better take that one.
I think we will make a signing, and I think it will require the investment from the club. I don't know who it's going to be. The more the days go on, the less confident I am on my little Hungarian friend that it's going to be him. Because I think RB Leipzig are going to nick in there. I think that we will sign someone. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the transformative figure that Thomas Partey has and should have been, should he have been bloody fit. But yeah, it's a really tough one to call. And right now I've heard nothing to tell me that we're going to be doing bits in January, as people like to say. Chris, let's go to Glenn Cook. He says, do you really think dropping Arteta before the summer window, which is due to be our biggest in years, is the smartest decision? These players do have the technical ability nor mentality to perform.
I think Glenn Cook qualified by saying they do not have.
Yes, he did. I was reading that as I said it, like, what? Yeah, do not have the technical ability nor the mentality.
Answer this very well is that they're going to give Arteta some time. I think they recognize that he's inherited a squad of players that weren't quite the ones that he chose, and he's still dealing with a lot of the impacts of the dead wood that he kind of inherited. So I think they're going to give him some time, and I think after the January window and the next summer window, if you're not seeing appreciable improvements, it's definitely time at that point to kind of say, Arteta's probably not the right man to get it right. And I know it's hard to hear, but I think that's the direction that the ownership team's going to go in.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I think ultimately the direction, it just needs to come from what works best with what we have, which is tricky to do right now, ultimately, with what is available. Wayne's World said, who do we need to get in Jan? Realistically, we kind of covered that already. I like this question, though, from Tangy Jared. He says, would you say that Arsenal is a bit of a Frankenstein team?
A little bit. You see some of the old guard in there with what the team wants to be in the future, and it does make for a little bit of an awkward mix. I think we lack players in their prime. We've got a crop of youngsters 22 and under that all look good, and we've got some guys 28 and over. We don't have many in that 23 to 27 range, so it does feel a little bit disjointed, but I would say yes, it's kind of a half and half of the old guard and then what we expect in the future kind of being pushed together.
Can I just make a point here? Frankenstein with the doctor and the monster.
Yes, I was waiting for you to do that.
I was just
Frankenstein's monster.
Frankenstein, we'd be able to create a monster, so in essence, it would be a good thing.
Yes, true. So we could do with a scientist right now that could actually fix players' injuries, probably more than anything. Abuza says, do you think all the negative criticisms could affect certain members in a destructive way? For example, Aubameyang's attitude has been first class. I actually think Aubameyang's a bad example for this, because I think Aubameyang's actually someone that kind of rides the wave of confidence of the goals that he scores. I think that ultimately he is someone that is not actually too affected by fan criticism. I think that he's very competent in what he has. I think he's more affected by kind of the form of and the quality of the players around him. However, that isn't to say that there aren't others in the squad that are. I certainly think that social media and the kind of the mental impact that it has on players is significant in the modern game, not just at Arsenal, but across the entirety of the sport. And I think it's something that needs to be put into greater focus, and certainly something that needs to have greater responsibility attached to it. So yes, I do, Abuza. I think that, but I don't agree that Aubameyang is one of those specific examples. Chris Lewis Kirikou says, do you like Buendia at Norwich for our base creativity? Haven't seen lots of him, but hear lots of good things, and is like that unfashionable player with Premier League experience.
I think if we're in line of we don't have a ton of money and he's someone that's available to us, he is Premier League proven. And we've spoken about this, that if he's done a job in the Premier League, there's no reason why that we should be overlooking these players. Norwich is currently top in the table in the Championship right now. And I haven't followed them too closely, but I'm sure Buendia has kind of been a big part of that. So I think it's someone that we should definitely look at. If Szoboszlai isn't available and if Aouar is not kind of within our budget, we need to do something in January. And if that's the best we can do, he's proven it. I think he was top at least 3 or 5 most creative players in the league last season.
Yeah.
Better players around him, and maybe something can click.
I think there's maybe someone that I need to do a tactical breakdown on. It's probably the way to look into it. I think we need to get some Norwich expertise. Maybe I'll find someone at the Athletic that can help us out. There was this one, Matthew D'Souza. Jared, he says, what will we do in January? Oh, we've kind of covered that. Panic buy the shorter term to help Arteta and only buy targets we need in the long term. We've kind of touched on that. Tulip, Jared says, why Holding was dropped yesterday in the first place. He is doing a decent job and is a good partner to Gabriel right now. I don't think he is getting much recognition from fans and Arteta.
Tulip and I are 100% on the same page on this one. I think in every predicted lineup I've done this season, I've wanted Holding in there. I think he's played well next to Gabriel, and in all of his games, I don't think he's done anything to lose his spot.
No, and I'm 100% with you on this. And I saw people tweeting saying they don't want Louise to come off because they're fearful that Holding would come on. And I was like, why? Holding has been good this season. Like, he has not been the issue with us this season at all. And I couldn't really understand what people were getting at with that. Amanda was very nice to quote the tweet and agreed with me on it as well. And I just couldn't really get my head around the idea that Holding is someone. And I think that ultimately that kind of epitomises that look at the unfashionable British kind of signing in a way, signing someone from the Premier League or the lower leagues within England, Buendia as well, and it affects me. Sometimes I've turned my nose up at a player like Buendia, but I always go back to that case study of Johnny Evans and thinking we could have had Johnny Evans as a centre back, and a lot of people turn their noses up at him. I want to go back to ask Chris a question from Daniel Robert, as he has asked it a couple of times. He says, question for Chris: what do you make of the defensive shape this season?
I think I covered this earlier. I think it's not good right now, especially when we're caught out of transition. We don't have the pace. We don't have the party to slow them down. I think that's the best way to say it, is that if he's not there, we get caught in transition and we look very poor. But once we're set up, as we saw in the Leeds game, they had a lot of shots, but a lot of them were from kind of the outside of the box. So I think once we're set, it's there, but it's the pressing for me that's been the biggest issue this season compared to last.
Entertainment and More asks a question that I'm just going to cover quickly because I think we touched on it before. Question for all: should Mikel Arteta stick with the 4-3-3, which I think is what he meant, because 4-4-3 it would be illegal. It's fair to say, or go back to the back five, as it seems that we have more structure as a team with the five than the formation. Hiding the weaknesses of Granit Xhaka and Dani Ceballos. I think if I speak for Jared, you were very much on the side of going back to the 3-4-3, and Chris, you were very much on the case of it didn't seem to matter which we went for. Creativity is going to be an issue in both senses. So there's an argument to say you stick with it and you try and persist, and gradually it will start to work, or do you go back? I'm sliding slightly more towards Jared. I think we've go into the 3-4-3, but I think it's important to maintain that there are no guarantees that it will succeed if we do go back to that 3-4-3. Matt Gray says, do you think that Mainsley, this is for you, Chris, regrets not moving to Wolves? He hasn't nailed a first team place. I just can't see him getting a regular spot at Arsenal.
I think it's a tough question because the bid wasn't high enough for us to sell. So I think the player himself, I think from what we heard from Ornstein, was he had actually agreed to the move in terms of like a weekly wage packet, but I don't think the clubs could ever agree on the price. So I think he's looking at the team right now, and he certainly does regret not being able to move over there. He's not getting game time in the Premier League, and I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity given the way that things have unfolded this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he needs to be given more minutes, but there's no guarantee of that. Let's quick fire through these. Chris Groover says, not sure if you've asked this yet, but Gabriel, opinions. Can we all agree that he has been our best player this season? I think is probably fair to say.
Been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been unbelievably good. That's for sure. What'd you say, Chris?
Own goal's gotten a lot of goals for us this season.
Own goal has been excellent for us. Yeah, I love that own goal guy. We should. Honestly, I don't know why he doesn't start. Manu says Max Aaron's better than Bellerin. Whenever I see a question about Bellerin and replacing him, my initial instinct is to go that there are so many other areas of the team that we need to be focusing on first before we worry about replacing Bellerin. That is what I would say about any questions towards that. Ollie Watkins missed a penalty. That's quite funny because my friend's got him in his fantasy team. Tulip says, should we sign all of our summer targets in January so that we can give them a regular for Tulip? I don't think we've got a chance of that happening, to be honest, because I don't think we have the money. Speaking of Norwich, what about Cantwell? Yes, thumbs up, thumbs down. Cantwell, what do we think? No. Yeah. Iffy. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
The championship this year.
He's what, sorry?
He's not doing well in the championship.
No, I've heard that. I heard that Buendia is the kind of at the forefront of things rather than Cantwell.
Can I make a point on the last question?
Yeah, go for it. I
think if we don't make a move in January, we're gonna regret it, mainly because I think that once the financial picture becomes clear for other clubs, you're going to have more competition for Szoboszlai and Howar and other targets like that. So if there is a time for Kroenke to kind of back Arteta, it is in January, so he can make hopefully an appreciable improvement in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it would be silly to do nothing. To do nothing would be catastrophic. Because you've seen what we're capable of with the current squad that we've got and the coach that we've got, and it's just we need improvements. Yes, it's going to be great having Martinelli back. It's going to be great when Pepe comes back, it seems, as well, from his form from the last game. Again, reactionary, just one game to analyse, but still it's better to have him than to not. Partey coming back as well. Manu says, any love for Lucien Favre? Again, I think it's situational. You look at how they're getting on at Dortmund, how he got on, I believe it was Nice in France. So it's situational. If it works there, it may not work here. It's a risk. Every time you change manager, it's a risk. And that's why the whole Mourinho thing is, I get what he's done at Spurs. It's looking to be quite good now. Let's judge it after a full season, see what happens. I also think that things were set up there a lot better than what Arteta has been able to have to set up at Arsenal. We'll finish this off with a nice question about my best friend. So from Russ Morgan says, do you think there's a chance of buying Szoboszlai in January but leaving him on loan at Salzburg? The answer to that question, 2 parts. Second part, no, he's not going to be going back on loan. That's not happening. First part, yes, there's a chance. Is it likely? I'm 50-50 with every day it going slightly towards the no side of things currently. That's where my head's at the moment. That is going to finish off today's show. Chris, absolute pleasure to have you on. It's nice that you're always in the chat box, but it's even better to have you on the show, mate.
Thank you, Tom. Always appreciate it. And thank you for allowing me to have some therapy after yesterday's game. No
problem.
Thank you, everyone.
It is a service we provide free of charge. Well, for some people, you prefer to pay for it. But no, it's an absolute pleasure. I should say that both of Chris and Jared are within our expert member and TGT ambassador tiers, which means they get the opportunity, as you've seen here today, to come on to the show. So if you'd like to join up, help support the channel, get access to some exclusive stuff, including shows, emojis, icons. We've got a trust the process emoji if you want to use that in the chat box, and a party time, which hasn't been seen much use recently either. But if you want to use that stuff, feel free to do it. It's funny, isn't it? All the people that I've made emojis of, Partey's got injured, Xhaka can get out of here, frankly. Mainsley not playing. Arteta, what's going on there? So yeah, it's not looking great.
It's the Reaper touch, Tom. You just got to stop doing it.
Yeah, I need to make a Mourinho emoji. That's what needs to happen. Ahead of the North London derby. Say again, Chris?
A Harry Kane one.
Yes. I don't think I could do myself to do that, to be honest. Okay. And Jared, of course, thank you ever so much, mate, for coming on. Really appreciate your time. Do you want to give a shout out to the pods that you've been helping out with Owen as well?
Oh, yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on. I love getting on to chat with you every now and again. Chris, nice to talk to you outside of the Discord. And everyone, if you are on the Discord, the members thing, be sure to tell Chris to get on Twitter, because unlike the rest of us, he refuses to jump in the gutter with the rest of us. And yeah, I love coming on TGT, and I also go on the Gooner Crack pretty regularly with Owen and the guys. So that's a lot of fun too. Definitely check that one out if you haven't.
Yeah, for sure. Please check out Owen's channel, Gooner Crack. That's C-R-A-I-C. It's an Irish word. Don't ask. Just don't ask. And of course, make sure you check out the Gooners podcast, which should be live right now. So if you've missed part of that start of the show, you can go jump over there now and watch those guys, and of course, you know, all the other great podcasts, Bergkamp Wonderland, etc. And Not Another Arsenal podcast by Mike Hernandez as well, that has recently launched too, which is fantastically named. Last thing before we wrap up, as I said at the start of the show, we are doing a giveaway, which is something we never really do. This is specifically at the moment for UK viewers. It's not down to me. Unfortunately, the people only have UK distribution with the product right now. It is set to go global in the new year. I am assured. But it's a fantastic item that it's just nice to be able to support a local business whilst, of course, the COVID situation is going on. And they're doing a giveaway. They've agreed to give away a set of football beer mats, which are specifically Arsenal related. So we've got Pires, Arsene Wenger, Dennis Bergkamp, Henry, Patrick Vieira and Kolo Touré. They're amazing quality, fantastic stuff. I'm not getting paid for this, by the way. It's not like a paid ad or anything. It's just a nice giveaway to do. Link for the tweet is in the description. Follow the account, follow ourselves, and give it a retweet, and you could be in to win one of these fantastic beer mats. So yeah, try it out. It's good stuff. And make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and of course turn those notifications on so you never miss a show, and join up to be a member if you would like to get access to exclusive content, and join the crazy Discord server as well. So we will see you again very, very soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.
Yes.